Hello, my name is Joshua Cobb, and today I will be going over one of the formative assessments I have planned out for the next unit I have. It will be specifically in regards to the United States during the Civil War, and it will task students with being able to answer questions on specific people that of note during the Civil War, specific events, or concepts in the Civil War as well. Um, as such, let's go over the assessment quickly and just see how students will not only be able to get the feedback they need rather quickly, as well as the way that the system will report on how well students do. So each question has essentially 3 to 4 answers that it can go. That can be correct. And the idea is not to trick students, but just have them tasked with being able to answer rather simple questions that will be consistently discussed. Like Abraham Lincoln here, you you have answers like he was a president of the Confederate States, general of the United States, general of the Confederate States, or the United President of the United States. These aren't questions that are meant to trick the students. It's things that are meant to make sure students are able to remember key people and events. With Kahoot specifically, it makes it a little more fun, as sometimes students complain that learning is not as entertaining as they need nowadays. So having it be in this digital format not only makes it more fun, but as well gives students the ability to have it more easily accessible because they don't need to be in the classroom to access it. They can be at home. As well as if they're participating in a group activity, they can have a little fun competition out of it who's not only able to answer the questions correctly, but in a faster time. Each question I have in mind should take no more than 45 seconds to answer. And as well, that will show in a report as well that can be later on used in reporting things specifically to the students as well as the parents. So continuing on, there's different question types, and each question is designed more so in the ability to give quick feedback. That way, students aren't waiting for me to grade them. Or if they type out an answer and they disagree with their answer being wrong, they're not waiting for me to come back and forth. This assessment is essentially designed mostly so they can quick yes or no, true or false, this person did, who was this person answers. That way they have that background. There are questions though that are not really designed to trick the students like this one, but it's more so designed to make the students think. Uh, Especially because one of the misconceptions about the Civil War is that the Union started it essentially to free the slaves. That's not the case. That's how most people have it remembered, though. So the goal is to make sure that misconception is also tackled, as well as with the last question on this assessment that I'll go over. Um, but essentially, it's a lot of basic during the Civil War questions that students should be able to know rather easily. And then with some not trick ones, but more thoughtful questions um, that have them thinking more about the unit and what's been gone over. Like this one, for example, it is more of a thought of like, okay, so what actually happened versus, and it's not a like, okay, with the prior ones, like, okay, yeah, Lincoln's the president of the Union. Jefferson was the president of the Confederacy, and then Robert E. Lee and then Ulysses S. Grant were respected generals to their side. As well as it also tackles not so talked about figures. Frederick Douglass is pretty well known, especially when people study African American involvement in the Civil War. But when it comes to trying to remember the Civil War overall, he's not really discussed. The same thing with Clarissa here. Clarissa is honestly, in my opinion, a figure that should have been talked about more because she was the founder of the American Red Cross. But the goal of the assessment is to get that surface level knowledge that all students know essentially about the Civil War, but as well as the deep dive into the Civil War as well that the unit will go over. And then this is the other misconception question that has students answering, when did the Civil War actually end? Because most people go with April 9th when Robert E. Lee surrendered, not really realizing that the Confederacy fought well until August 20th. So that's why these aren't quote unquote trick questions, but they are questions that have students think more. So we'll get out of that because this is now just mostly fun stuff that makes it more entertaining for the students. The real goal is to have them be able to answer all that stuff. Now, when it comes to reporting and feedback, Kahoot has this great feature of reports. Now, mind you, since this is a not specifically teacher's account, there's probably even more in this. This is kind of a public account, but you can pull up the records of how the test went. You can see the participants and it breaks down this. So we'll click me again. This is one I took earlier just to get this report generated. It tells you if the students got it wrong, how long it took, and the point thing, unless you're using the Kahoot scoring system, that's not of any concern, but really is the time it took and if the student got it right or wrong. That way, this can be printed out, given to the parents, like, hey, this is how they did on this assessment. Printed out, sent up, email, and all the fun ways that the districts allow us to communicate with families. But other than that, the assessment it's not meant to be extreme. The depth of knowledge is really only a one, kind of two with some of those questions, having them really recall that information on those kind of more tricky questions to get answered. Um, as well, this will be used to show if a student has mastery of information in the Civil War. If they can name the leaders, both politically and militarily, as well as some of the more misconceived concepts like who started the Civil War with Fort Sumter. A lot of people like to debate that. So that idea is to set in stone that yes, the Confederacy not only did mobilize first, but they did attack. But it also tackles the misconception of the Union really didn't do it for start the Civil War for one, but two, their main goal wasn't at first to free the slaves. They used the Civil War as an excuse to free the slaves. And then the last thing it also shows mastery on is when the actual Civil War ended. A lot of the misconception is that it ended with the surrender of Robert E. Lee. That is a misconception. The Confederacy fought a little longer, but then did officially surrender in August 20th after President Andrew officially ended it with the last surrender of the last Confederate holdouts. With that, the that kind of shows the mastery. Now, if students are unable to answer the misconceptions and they still go based off of the more typical answers, Robert E. Lee surrender and the Union fought the Civil War for slavery, it shows that the misconceptions need to be more tackled in the next unit, portion of the unit, as that will tackle the Reconstruction era. But it also shows that if students are not able to answer questions based off Frederick Douglass or Clarence, that it shows that there's not mastery enough to show more not well-known figures, but figures that are not talked about as much in the public sense of the Civil War. Now, if students are unable to answer the more basic questions like about Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Jefferson, and Robert E. Lee, that shows that there is a inability to master the Civil War concept at all, and having to remediate that and go back and figure out what went wrong with teaching the unit would be vital. Now, when it comes to reporting progress to students and families in an ethical manner, like I said with this report, it does basically lay things out, correct how long it took. So with that in mind, when it comes to successful students, obviously that'd be great. There's not really a concern with a more ethical reporting, just making sure that the students not only can graduate, but as well the families informed of that good progress. More or less the issue when it comes to ethical reporting is when they have families with a more education rigorous background, with the idea that this unit's going to be tackling a lot of the misconceptions. If and say for this instance, this assessment comes back with a not so positive grade, reporting to the parents in an ethical way. It's not the idea that, oh, hey, you know, they were wrong. It's that they did not learn to correct the misconception that they had. So it's taking that negative, turning it into a positive and saying, hey, it's not to not pin the blame on the student because obviously they needed to learn it through the unit in the lesson specifically on the Civil War, but it's also to say they go with what the general conception is of, let's say, obviously the end of the Civil War with Robert E. Lee surrendering. They think that's still the end. So it's not that they were wrong per se, but it's the idea that they did not, for lack of a better word, re-educate themselves on that misconception. But other than that, reporting it to the parents, it's still turning that negative into a slight positive that they still, in a more common sense, could be right. But with the purpose of the unit in tackling a lot of misconceptions, they still have ground to work on, and that, of course, there will be remediation and so on and so forth in the next portion of the unit. But other than that, again, my name has been Joshua Cobb, and this has been an example of one of the formative assessments I will have in the unit on the Civil War, both before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and after the Civil War. Other than that, have a great rest of your day. Bye.